Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And I've got another disturbing story for you guys today. You guys know I cover a lot of local politics. I do federal and state level too, but government overreach doesn't just happen at the federal level. So this interview is going to highlight a situation that actually probably happens all across the country, and we just don't know about it because it doesn't get talked about. But before I bring on my guests, uh, make sure that you like this, share this, and please subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. I don't know what you're doing with your life. You're probably not doing much because you're not subscribed to me, and that's key. So you guys got to rectify that right now. All right. Thank you kindly. And also check out my Substack. It's called Chasing Liberty, where I talk about issues like this and others. As you can reach that at libertychasers.com. All right. Well, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring on my guests here. I have with me Mr. Don Bourgeois and Johanna Talcott from the Pacific Legal Foundation. Welcome to the program, y'all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
No
Awesome.
worries.
Okay, so we're gonna get into your story, Mr. Bourgeois, as to what happened when you just wanted to make some changes to your rental property, which should be normal for anybody. And obviously, Joanna Talcott from the Pacific Legal Foundation is going to expound on the legalities of the situation. But before we get into all that, why don't you two just kind of give a little bit of background on who you are and where you come from, all that good stuff.
Okay. Who do you want to go first?
Ladies first. I have to be polite.
There you go. I like that.
All right. My name is Johanna Talcott. I'm a property rights attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation, and we're currently representing Don in a federal lawsuit against the city of Largo. And what has happened is the city of Largo placed a whole bunch of ordinance violations on Don's rental property and told him that he had 30 days to fix them, a whole litany of very small, minor items. And Don tried to set about getting to work on all these issues, was trying to comply in good faith, and they allowed those fines to start compounding for $250 a day over the course of almost 10 years and eventually foreclosed on the property, taking all of Don's hard work and almost life savings in the process.
Wow. Okay. So Don, can you kind of just take us back to the beginning? How did this whole situation come about from your perspective?
Okay. It's a long story, but
That's
here
fine.
we go. Uh, I was in the building business. I had a design build company in Boston for 25 years. And then when up in when my parents got elderly and my dad passed away, they had property in Florida in Dunedin. And I decided that at that point in my life, I was going to invest in some rental property in Florida, close to where my mom was. And that's when I bought the the property in Largo back in 2013, I believe. And it needed work, and I knew that. I was in the business. I knew what to do, how to do it, and the procedures. So when I first got it, I said about the main building needed a new roof, which I got a permit for, which they gave me uh, as a property owner. But then come to find out that since the property was commercial, a homeowner cannot pull a building permit. And I needed to have a third party contractor do the work, which was not my intent when I bought the property, obviously, because it's much more costly. So in 2015, I got written up. One of the issues was the roof and a few other items. And when I spoke to the fellow, Mr. Jensen, he indicated to me that he wanted things done. And actually, this was over the phone because I was up in New Hampshire. My mother was up there at the time
Okay.
with some medical issues. So when he called me, I told him, I said, "Look, I'm up in New Hampshire. I don't know when I'm going to be able to get back down there." So he contacted me again about 20 days later or whatever. Said, "Well, I'm going to have to write you up because I haven't seen you down here." I said, "Well, I told you. Um, my mother's in a health situation and I can't get down there. So he did write me up, and then I had to go in front of the board, which I did, and they told me how bad I was and everything else, and they assigned me with a $250 a day uh, fine. So I went back. I had to come back up to New Hampshire, and then I got another notice that I needed to go in front of the board again. I called up Mr. Jensen, and he indicated to me, he said, "Oh, don't worry about that. That's just, you don't have to go to that." Well, the more I think back as all of these events, come to light, that's probably was the 30-day window that I had to, appeal the situation. But I was told by Jensen, a city official, that I didn't need to be there. The other thing he told me was that they assess these fines, but procedure, things had basically what happens is they forgive if you take care of the problems. And that was, he pointed out a couple of situations where people had accumulated large fines and they were forgiven at the end.
Mhm.
So I guess about 5 years later, I mean, at that point, there's 3 buildings on the property, smaller buildings. I had all the roofs rebuilt, redone by a contractor, and a number of other things. I have the whole history of permits that I, took out. Uh, then about 5 years later, the head code enforcement person came by, and I didn't know, but I found out later because I asked for, a summary of my case, and he indicated that on his visit that I had done nothing. Basically, he said I had done nothing, and I called him up and I said, "Look," I said, "I've had at least 3 or 4 permits pulled to redo roofs and other things on this property." And I mean, okay, I can go online and see what permits have been pulled.
Mhm.
Here's the head code enforcement person, Mr. Schofield, and he acknowledged, okay, yes, I'm sorry, and acknowledged that, yes, I had done all these things. So, I mean, as time went on, I'm accumulating these fees with the assumption that it's going to be forgiven.
Mhm.
Well, the reality of it is, one of the reasons that Mr. Schofield came by at that time was with the same time that the city had an attorney, and I don't think I can mention names. Joanna, is that okay, or should I not mention names?
I think it's fine to say the name of the attorney on your case.
It's fine.
Yes.
Okay, not on my case, but I'm
Right.
talking.
Well,
Okay.
he was the attorney on the initial foreclosure action. So
Oh,
I just
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
want to jump in and say real quick, the city first started assessing fines. They gave them about 30 days to comply, which isn't enough time to pull permits and even hire people if you were able to do that to get everything finished in that short of a period of time. But once that 30-day appeal period was up, then those fines, which were again $250 per day, those become a lien that the city now owns. And so, once they just allow those fines to accumulate, they let them sit for, again, what ended up being almost a decade. They didn't move to foreclose on that lien until that $250 a day fine reached almost $600,000. And it was only then that they decided to foreclose. And so if you think about this in broad strokes, the purpose of these sort of ordinances that, building codes and safety regulations, they're designed to protect public health and welfare. If all of these issues with Don's property were so dangerous and such a hazard, why did they wait 6 years to actually foreclose on the property and make good on that lien? And
10
again,
years, they waited 10 years.
right, Don
Yeah.
again spent all that time, all that money, all that investment, all that effort to comply in good faith with all the issues that the city was pointing out. And these weren't major things. It wasn't crumbling, structures. It was a roof that needed some work, shingles, a little bit of rotten wood around the trim, things like that. And Don was working that whole entire time to fix things.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Go
Really
ahead.
quick, Don, before my next
Yeah.
question, can you move back a little bit so we can see your face? Right now, we just see your
Oh,
glass.
I'm sorry.
There you
How
go.
was that?
Yeah, yeah, we can see that you're that strapping young
Okay.
lad here.
Yeah, it's a strapping young 73-year-old man.
So here's a question. If I'm getting this correctly, you were a licensed builder with an architectural engineering background. Why did they require you to go to a third-party contractor to do something you probably could have done yourself?
Because it was a commercial property. So yeah, and I was not licensed in Florida, and they do not reciprocate with license. I had a Massachusetts builder's license. I had a Boston builder's license.
Mhm.
I mean, I had a design build firm. We did everything from the plans to the cabinets. We even had a cabinet shop. And the fellows tell me that I can't. He basically said to me, he says, I said, well, how about the rotten boy? He says, no, you need a licensed contractor to do that. I said, seriously? I mean, give me a break. But the thing is, I think what happened is I think the city at that point, uh, they were their situation was that yes, they assessed the fines, but I think in reality there was a period of time where they did forgive. And I think the problem is, and that's when Schofield came by to see where I was at to assess things, is when this new lawyer came into town. His name's Matt Widener. And mine is not the only case that has had this situation. I know of 7 in Largo that are as extreme as mine, but it's also a lot of other towns. And Mr. Widener convinced the towns that this was a source of revenue for them, that, they need to go after these fines. And obviously, he uses the rule of the 30-day appeal when he takes it to the courts. He did his homework. He's also working on a 40% commission. So, needless to say, he's lining his pockets. So, the thing that really irks me is even after Schofield came by in, I think it was 2019,
Mhm.
then I I continued to do work, and there was one point where they were going to foreclose. I put up a $50,000 bond to put a stay on it because they said I still had things to do. I had a deck rebuilt, second story deck. It had to be engineered. I needed to get a survey, and the deck was a $30,000 deck, which I had done.
Mhm.
Okay. I have I have emails, correspondence, inter emails in the city of Largo where they actually say I was compliant.
Mhm.
Yet 3 weeks later, they foreclosed on my property. So what I see has happened is they hung me, put me out there to make the improvements on the property so that I would up the value of the property so that when they sold it, they would, get their $600,000. Well, what happened is they did not put a reserve clause for the sale, and the thing sold for $99,000. Okay.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah. So I mean it's like a lot of this stuff happened over a period of time, but obviously now, as I go through things, things come to light and say, okay, this is why this happened at that period of time. This is why Schofield came by. It's also the same time that Widener got involved. I went in front of the commission, the in front of the town commission a week before the sale and pleaded my case. And I basically told him, I said, look, You guys are the only ones that can stop this sale because the attorney, Widener, has no motivation to stop it because he wants his 40% commission.
Mm.
And then after that, I have I have emails inter, within the town. Basically, they were asking, okay, what's up with his property? And I have an email that says I was full compliant,
Mm.
yet they still foreclosed.
So let me get the picture right here just to make sure I'm
Yep.
understanding. So they come to you, they say, "Oh, you got to do these renovations, these changes to bring the rental property up to code." You invest all this money and time, build a brand new deck,
Mm-hmm.
and then they come in and steal
Brand
it
new roof,
anyway.
brand new roof,
Brand
brand
new
new
roof.
decks. Yes.
And then the city comes in and basically steals a property so that they can sell to somebody. So they had you put all that money into it
Oh yeah.
and then it
Yeah.
took it from you to sell to somebody else.
Yep.
It's almost like if I didn't know any better, that they had you do all these repairs, upgrade the property, like you said, just so they can up the property value, take it from you, and sell it for something more. Am I
Yep.
getting too tinfoil hatty
Oh, you
here?
got. Yep. That's exactly what happened. Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this. So, going back to what you said about the code enforcement officer leading you to believe that the fines would be forgiven, was that in writing or was that just like a
Yes.
verbal type? It was in writing.
No.
Okay.
No. 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 It was not in writing. No. It was.
Oh, it
It
was
was a
not in.
verbal thing. But I asked him. I even. He came by. I don't know. He was in the area, and I ran into him, and I said. He said, what have you been doing? And I said, well, I got the roofs done and stuff like that. And then I said, well, there's still, the deal is you guys still forgive he says, well, he says things that are kind of changing around a little bit. And again, it's the same time that Mr. Widener got into the picture.
Okay. And I want to talk
Yes,
more
sir.
about Widener in a second, but Johanna, can you come in and just give like the legal perspective of this? This has to be like a billion constitutional violations right here, right?
Well, so we're only raising two in our lawsuit, but they're good ones. The first one is we're raising an excessive fines claim, saying that the $600,000 lien that they ended up slapping onto Don's property and ultimately foreclosing on, taking his property, was excessive in light of the relatively minor harm related to the ordinance violation. So, as I mentioned, these things were not major structural defects on the property. They were a little bit of rotten wood, some work on the roof, maybe a lot of small things, but nothing that rendered the property uninhabitable. And actually, we talked to several of his tenants. They were really happy on the property. He gave them a great deal on rent. And at a time when rent is high all over the country and people have a hard time finding places to live, I think Don provided a pretty valuable service in a city that was otherwise getting pretty expensive and cost prohibitive. So, so the ultimate claim there on the excessive fines is that this is disproportionate to the harm. That taking someone's property, charging them $600,000 for these minor code violations violates the Eighth Amendment. The second claim that we're bringing is a procedural due process claim, and that is related to that 30-day window of time that Don had to appeal the initial municipal order, turning those fees that at that point had only accrued to about $7,500. Once that became a lien, he only had 30 days to appeal it. But those fines kept accruing for the next 6, 7 years. So to never have another notice of those fines continuing to accrue, especially given them telling him that they could ultimately be forgiven, again, we think that that's a procedural due process violation. You should have an opportunity to challenge those ongoing fines, especially if each day is effectively treated as another violation.
Mhm.
And also, another thing that I think is really important to note is when they first put those fines on Don's property, they listed a whole handful of things and they just said $250 a day and that's it. And as Don continued to fix things, they never revisited that amount. They never reduced the daily fine. They never changed anything. And so again, that really strikes to the core of procedural due process. It's just fundamentally unfair.
Right, right. Yeah, and the thing is, if they hadn't, so Don, if they hadn't led you to believe that this would be for that the fines would be forgiven, what steps would you have taken? Like if you were under the impression that, oh, this could rack up, what would you have done?
At that point, I probably would have either tried to sell the property or bailed out. I mean, I mean, the amount of money that I put into the property. I mean, even the $50,000 bond, they ended up scooping the Widener's office scooped that up, not the city. After because I personally, after my lawyer couldn't get anywhere, I personally called up the bonding company and I said, okay, what happened to the $50,000 bond? And they told me that somebody from Matt Widener's office had come in and basically said that, they needed to release it to him.
Hmm.
I mean, no court order, nothing. They took that $50,000.
Mm.
All right. So it's like, I, I'm like, they set me up to basically put all this money. If I had no, I would have backed out. I would have been better off even in the last year. I would have been $100,000 ahead of the game because I wouldn't have put up the $50,000 bond. I wouldn't have put a $30,000 deck in, and I wouldn't have put in I hired another contractor to take care of every little freaking thing that was wrong with that property. Even to a point where on one of the last days, Schofield himself came on the property and checked everything out. Yet 3 weeks later, they sold the property.
Wow, wow.
So,
So can you give me, and
yeah,
this question can be for both of you. Can you give me a better feel for who Widener is? Like who is this person? What was his role? I didn't quite catch that. And but also it sounds like things changed when he took over. So can you give me an idea of how he has approached the situation?
Yeah,
uh,
so Matt Weiner is an attorney, and I think historically he defended foreclosures, and has experience in the foreclosure space. But what happens is these cities will impose municipal fines, for code, ordinance violations and things like that. And then once they convert into a lien, they hire an outside attorney to then file the foreclosure and process those foreclosures. So this is actually kind of a common practice. And as you mentioned, this particular attorney, Matt Widener, has had several of these cases in Largo, but also across Florida. This is a pretty common practice, and just with a simple Google search, you'll find a whole slew of articles describing circumstances very similar to Don's. And there is definitely incentives on the part of the city and on the part of these private foreclosure attorneys to allow the fees to rack up really, really high, so that people get to a point where they're unmanageable, and can't be repaid to redeem the property. And that's when they will foreclose on them and turn around and sell them.
I
Yes.
just want to add my understanding about Matt Widener is that he courted uh, these cities and convinced them that this was a source of revenue. And he actually used to be on the other side. He used to represent people who were being foreclosed on. And I think he saw an opportunity that if he went on the other side, he could make more money. That's
Oh,
that's my take on it.
yeah.
And Jeff, I can actually send you, the Miami Herald did a really good report talking about this exact issue, municipalities foreclosing on properties for ordinance violations, and it does talk about Matt Widener. It talks about other attorneys that do this, and kind of the amount of revenue that is generated through this process. And I think it's very illuminating to see. And there's a lot of incentives in place for cities to abuse their police powers.
Yeah, it sounds like this is pretty widespread. How long has this been going on? Is this kind of a new phenomenon in Florida, or does this go back far?
Well,
You know, I can't say I'm super familiar with how long it's been happening, but it's definitely increasing, probably in the last decade or so, as cities start to realize that this is a good way to pad the coffers.
Okay, okay. do you know of any other legal actions or lawsuits that are being under like aside from yours that are combating these abuses?
Yeah, actually, our a similar organization, the Institute for Justice, is appealing one of their cases up to the Florida Supreme Court,
Oh,
again with a very similar issue. And so, as we've talked about, this 30-day deadline to appeal municipal orders on these fines, that's actually a state law. And procedurally, it's just a very difficult hurdle for a lot of people. You know, if you're not familiar with the law, if this is not something that you're very savvy with, it's very easy for a deadline like that to slip by. So it really is not just a problem kind of at this level with these lawsuits and things like that, but I think legislatively, it's something that Florida State really needs to take a look at and consider how this affects people like Don and all the people that like the Institute for Justice represents. They've had several cases as well. But it's something that we're really starting to target in Florida. And I'm sure with a little bit of with a little bit of research, we'll find it is a problem all over the country.
yeah, yeah, and I love both you guys. Shout out to Institute for Justice. I love those guys. I love Pacific Legal Foundation. You guys are great. I love the work you guys do. It also gives me a lot to write about. I'm being a little selfish there, but I mean, this stuff needs to be highlighted for obvious reasons. So with this specific lawsuit, what are you guys hoping to achieve here? Obviously, I mean, Don needs to be made whole. What they did to him was wrong. But could this potentially lead to broader reform? Because it sounds like Florida kind of needs it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be our ultimate goal. PLF also has a pretty strong legislative effort all over the country. So it's something that we'd like to have our team target and see. I think once our governor heard about something like this, I think that he would probably be a strong voice in support of reform on this effort. Because again, it's really just about incentives. If the city has a way to abuse these relatively, minor powers, the power to enforce municipal ordinances, but you'll hear cases about people losing their home because the grass grew too long. So this just really is a problem that needs to be addressed. And actually, I should mention we have another case up in Washington, D.C., where a family owned their home. It was a generational home that was owned since about the 1930s.
Mm.
And Washington, D.C., put taxes on the property that became so unbelievably prohibited. They went from about $6,000 a year to $30,000 a year.
Wow.
And it just got to the point where the family was unable to keep on top of it. They sold the lien to a private party, and now they're trying to foreclose on the property. So again, this is all over the country. This is a huge issue. But yeah, in Florida especially, we're seeing it pretty frequently.
This is like this reminds me of it's almost like a version of civil asset forfeiture, but just not involving police officers. Like it just seems it's
Right.
and in these cases, it seems like the city can actually steal more money than they would have just from pulling somebody over and taking their cash. This seems even more like insidious. I mean, and it doesn't seem like a whole lot of people understand how often this happens.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I'll point out when they did foreclose on Don's property, the fees were up to about 600,000, but when they turned around and sold it, they only sold it for about $100,000. And I mean, keep in mind, at the time, the tax assessor, the value of the property was listed at almost $500,000. So it was just completely, undervalued at the sale. But even after all that, they still tried to go after Don for the remainder of those fines.
Wait, they still try to go
But
after him for
between the hundred,
fines after they stole and sold his property?
yeah.
Oh, they came after me. Yes, they came after me. They were personally. I did get an appraisal of the property, and it came in at over $800,000. And that they did not win on that, fortunately. But I had to spend more money, more legal fees. Yeah, they came after me again.
Wow.
Yep.
It notes in that Miami Herald article that Don is the first person that they went after for the difference in fines. And we think that's probably related to the fact that Don tried to appeal to the Florida Supreme Court. We actually represented him on an appeal from his initial foreclosure action, trying to get the Florida Supreme Court to take up the case and hear these excessive fines claims.
Hmm.
And so there may have been some degree of retaliatory nature related to them going after Don for that difference of fines. It was the only example that the Miami Herald could find of the city going after someone like that.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that, like, once you said that he was the first person they've gone after this way, I'm like, yeah, but he's actually been fighting against this, so that's probably why. I mean, we just see this all the time, and
Still fighting.
Here's a question, and this one Don can answer first, because I always hear people say, well, if you just follow the rules, this stuff doesn't happen. How would you respond to that?
I thought I was following the rules. I mean, it's like I thought I was doing the right thing. No, I mean, nobody told me I wasn't doing the right thing for 10 years.
Mm,
So think about it. I mean, they had a lot of opportunities to, come knocking on my door. And the only time, that Schofield came by was it 4 or 5 years after the fact. And he didn't even know I had pulled permits. So what does that tell you? I mean, he's a city official. I mean, anybody can go online and see what permits have been pulled on a property. And I'm like, I don't know. It's just, and then at the end, to get me to put up a $50,000 bond and put a $30,000 deck, and knowing that even if I did that, they were still going to foreclose. And I mean, to me, that. I mean, I don't know if the proper word is extortion or what, but they really set me up. They set me up.
yeah, it's extortion. Yeah, I'll say it. It is.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
So last question, and this one's for both of you. If there's anything that you would want people to know about this, who may not really know that this stuff happens, if there's anything that you would want them to know, what would you want them to know? Don, you can go first.
Well, my if anybody's in a situation like that, don't take the word of anybody from the officials. I mean, I took the word from the code enforcement person. At that point, I probably should have contacted a lawyer immediately to
Mm,
make sure that I wasn't being led down a path that I ended up being led on. I took their word for it.
hmm hmm The government lies all the time. What about
Oh
you,
yeah.
Johanna?
Yeah, I think I'll echo that same sentiment. The moment you get any sort of municipal order or notice of violation or anything like that, sometimes this stuff is designed to be confusing and a little unclear. And if you're not familiar with legal jargon or something like that, it could be really easy to overlook something. And I think that 30-day deadline for appeals is just the prime example because that really could be the difference between being able to assert your constitutional rights or not. In under Florida law, if you don't assert certain constitutional claims on those appeals, you waive them in state action, and that's why we're bringing this now to federal court. So I think it is really important, even if you're uncertain, to consult with an attorney and make sure that you preserve your rights and protect yourself going forward. A little investment on the front end can really save you on the back end. And Don is a really good example of that because yeah, he really did rely in good faith on the words of the code enforcement officer and the city. And I think behaved in accordance with what was happening around him. They weren't coming after him. They weren't sending him notices about violations. They weren't foreclosing on the property again for years and years after that initial violation. So I think that he really honestly believed that they were behaving as they said that they would. So it's very important to make sure that you know exactly what you're up against, even if it seems relatively minor.
On the 30-day item, uh, again, I relied and I didn't realize until long after the fact that there was a 30-day window. And when I was asked to go back in front of that board and asked Mr. Jensen if I needed to go. He said, no, it's just, it's not important. You don't need to go. Well, come to find out, that was the 30-day window. So I gave that up because I was told that I didn't need to go to that. Had I consulted with an attorney prior to that, I probably would have been told, no, you need to go in front of that board, or at least have a representative go in front of that board. So,
I see.
lesson learned, very expensive lesson.
Yeah, yeah, unfortunately, but hopefully your story will educate other people so that maybe they don't fall into that same trap. And it is a trap. And hopefully this people will make people
Oh,
more aware.
yep.
Yeah. Well, I definitely appreciate both of you guys coming on. Just really quick before we sign off, where is the lawsuit right now? Like, what are the next steps?
So we filed the complaint, and the city had, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks to respond, and they asked for an extension of time of 30 days. So their response, whether it's an answer or a motion to dismiss, that will be due on July 9th. So we'll see how the city responds to the lawsuit then. And I just sent you a link to that Miami Herald report that talks about Don's case and about some of the other examples across Florida.
Got it. Got it. Awesome. Well, again, thank you for coming on, and I'm hoping for great results. I'll be paying attention. And to the audience, until next time, stay free, stay principled, and most importantly, stay ungovernable.